Hi, this is James Cook of the University of Maine at Augusta, and in this video we'll be taking a look at how to work with the text of a tweet and how to take information out of it to embed in different kind of data structures. A tweet, a post on Twitter, is not simply a piece of text, but contains some references, called mentions, and some indirect references often shortened to websites or URLs, the website addresses. Hashtags are also a feature of these tweets. Mentions, URLs, and hashtags are actually pieces of relational data that connect a tweet to something else, to a user, to a website, and to a line of discussion about a topic. How can we take that information out and think about the relationship between them and characterize all such relationships so that we can work with those relationships in the future? We'll be working with the Raspberry Pi today and the language Python in order to accomplish that.
So to capture information about URLs and hashtags and other users that are mentioned in tweets using Raspberry Pi, we're going to build on the programming basics that we learned in previous videos. Look at those previous videos in my series to find out how to engage in that. But we're going to use the Raspberry Pi's terminal's basic word processor called Pico. You could also use one called Nano. They end up being almost functionally the same. So let's do that, and let's call this CSV extract .py. By typing this, we're creating the file and we're starting up the word processor environment. The first thing we're going to need to do is type in 2 lines to import Python packages or modules called Tweepy and CSV. Tweepy, remember, is one that allows us to interact with Twitter, and CSV is one that allows us to write CSV files, comma delimited files, which are the bread and butter of databases, almost universally readable by any database program. Then to interact with Twitter, we're going to need to type in a consumer key, which is going to be whatever is between those quotes. I'm not going to share mine with you right now because that is a secret, and it should remain a secret. But you will have obtained one from Twitter. How? Look earlier in the series. You're also going to have an access token. And you're going to have an access token secret. This is your set of 4 essentially passwords to get into Twitter and to use its API. Then you're going to type in a general authorization, OAuth handler that is going to use the consumer key and the consumer secret, and you're going to type in, this is really just magic words, align. Again, we've covered this in a previous video. Another set of handshakes with Twitter's API having to do with your access token and your access token secret. Okay, so that's just getting access to Twitter. And what are we going to do? We're going to name an object that is connecting us there. Then let's go ahead and do something with this. Let's get some data. Remember, if you put a hashtag in front of any text, it's a comment. So that's not, you don't have to type that in, but I'm telling you what we're doing. Then let's get some tweets. And right now, as I'm shooting this video in 2016, perhaps the most interesting individual to get tweets from, no matter where you fall on the political spectrum, has got to be Donald Trump. And his handle on Twitter is Real Donald Trump. So let's get started, and let's get started first with getting the tweets themselves. And we're going to print out a log of them. So to do that, we're going to simply just print to the screen so we can check our work, that for every tweet in this access we get called user tweets, which you see up above, we're going to want to do the following. We're going to want to print tweet created at and tweet text. These are variables that are obtained through the API, and reviewing from a previous video, if you go to Twitter's API page, you can see all the different variables that you can collect. So we're going to want to print out one CSV file that simply contains the text of the tweet, the details of the tweet itself, not necessarily the URLs or the hashtags or mentions. Why? So we can reference that, and we can use that file to connect all the other files we get together. It's always good to save your work. So we're going to write to a CSV file containing tweets. And to do that, we're going to open up a new CSV file, and we're going to call it CSV file. And reviewing material from before, we're going to open the file. We're going to give it a name, CSV of tweets.csv. We're putting that in quotes, and we're wanting to make that format broadly readable, and that's what the WB is all about. Then we're going to start up the CSV writer, and we're going to make that command, csv.writer, have a CSV file, and we're going to use what's called a pipe delimiter rather than a comma delimiter. Why? Because tweets often have commas in them, and that just makes things a mess. Pipes, this pipe character, which is usually underneath your backspace, is unusual. They don't appear in texts. So we'll work with that, and that's a great way to separate out these different elements. And then we're going to start writing rows. And we're going to write row with a date timestamp, date time stamp, and then tweet ID, and then a third field, which is the text of tweet. This second field, tweet ID, is really important because in every field we have, we're going to use that tweet ID to identify a unique element. We're going to close it off with double parentheses. So we have written a header here, It's the text of the header. Now we need to go get the data itself for the tweets, and this should all be review. To do that, we are going to, for every tweet in user underscore tweets, we are going to identify the tweet ID as the string of the ID. Then we are going to make it a little better by replacing some possibly problematic text that uses carriage returns and end of lines and would complicate our data. And we're going to replace it. Okay, if you're wanting an explanation, look at an earlier video. We're going to replace the end of line, which is understood as a \n, with a mere space. Then finally, we're going to write another row. And unlike above, when we created simply the headers, date, time, stamp, tweet ID, and text of tweet, headers are always good. We're actually going to put in data the actual tweets. We did that before, so I'm simply going to type in the code that works. Okay, we're using these variables, tweet created at, tweet ID, and then making sure that we get Unicode of the better tweet so that we don't have strange kind of characters that break our work. And we're going to encode that as UTF, which is a nice general format. Then we're going to close off all our work with an end square bracket and an end parentheses. Okay, so when we do that, we're going to create a new file, CSV of tweets. But now we've done that before. Let's create something a little more interesting. Let's create a separate CSV file that contains all the URLs, all the web addresses that are in those same tweets. So to do that, we're going to start a new section. Write to CSV file containing URLs. And it's going to look a lot like what's up above, except that we're going to have to do a little bit of extra work. Okay, so just like above, and in fact, I'm going to copy this stuff from above, we're going to write out a new CSV file. We'll call it CSV file 1. And it's not going to be CSV of tweets. It's going to be CSV of URLs. And we're going to open up a new CSV writer, CSV writer 1, and it's going to work with CSV file 1. We're going to keep the pipe delimiter. And for the CSV writer 1, we're going to have 2 columns, not 3. The first one is going to contain the tweet ID. So that will connect the above CSV file for all the tweets and their texts to the ones with URLs. And then we're going to have a second field, a second column in our data, which is describing the URL. So it's going to be like a spreadsheet with 2 columns and as many rows as we collect tweets from. And then we're going to have a very similar command from above, which is saying, hey, let's go to each tweet in user underscore tweets. But this time, as we collect the tweet ID as above to be the string, that is the text of the tweet ID, we're going to then continue and we're going to say that for every URL in tweet.entities, what entities? The URLs. We're going to do something. So this line is special. It's saying, look at all the URLs in all the tweet.entities. This is just a feature of the Twitter API, and it's going to say we're going to do something for every one of those URLs. What are we going to do? We're going to process it, because it turns out you can get a lot of different kinds of URLs. You can get one kind of URL text, which we'll call URL1, is an expanded URL. And that's if you have like a URL shortening service that's often posted there. Well, we want the expanded URL. Now, sometimes expanded URLs are there and sometimes they're not, so we're also going to want to collect a different kind of URL text. We'll call it URL text 2, and this is the address that maybe isn't expanded at all. Well, we want whichever is the more descriptive URL. That's the one we want. So we need to compare now URL text 1 to URL text 2. How can we do that? We can say, well, whichever one is longer is probably more descriptive. So let's take the length of the first one. We'll call it len1, and that's going to be equal to the length of it. And to get the length of any string, any variable, use the command len, L-E-N. So let's get the length, the len, of URL text 1. And then let's get the length, the len, of URL text 2. Okay? So then let's say, well, what's our ultimate URL text going to be? The one that we're going to work with. We won't call it URL text 1 or URL text 2. We'll just call it the plain old URL text, the ultimate one that we want. And let's say, to start off with, let's assume that it's going to be URL text 2. But wait, you said, sometimes we'll want to use URL text 1, right? Well, sure. So we can say, let's override that in a certain circumstance. If the length of 1 is greater than the length of 2, len2, then we'll make URL text equal to something else, URL text 1. Does that make sense? Okay, so we've collected the URL, we've collected the tweet ID, we're almost ready to go. I want to do one more thing though. I want to print off a notice here so that I can see that URL extraction is going on. So I'm going to put this notice right there. So I can check the work on the screen as we go. I'm going to want to print below that the tweet ID and then the URL text. And because those are variables, I don't want to put those in quotes, otherwise it would just give me the actual text of those variables. Finally, the last thing I want to do is as I did before, going to want to write out into the CSV file. Which one? CSV writer 1. I'm going to write a row. And what's that row going to contain? Well, it's simply going to contain two variables, and they are tweet ID and URL text. So that's the idea. We're doing a few loops, one in which we loop through all tweets, and within each tweet, then we loop through all URLs. And then within the URLs, we figure out which version of the URL we want to use. We call that URL text. Then we're going to print that on the screen so we can look at what's going on. And we're going to use CSV writer to figure out and to add to, a CSV file, one that's going to show up and remain saved on our computer. And that's going to save the URLs, the web addresses that are used in each of these tweets. So we'll continue by looking at two other kinds of detail, and those are hashtags and mentions. Write to a file with hashtags in each row. What kind of hashtags? We're going to find out what the tweet ID is and what the text of the hashtag was. So to do that, we're going to really almost replicate the previous section. In fact, I'm going to take it and I'm going to copy that text, then make just a few changes. The first thing to do is to make our CSV file have a different name and to refer to different variables in writing that file. So the file name is going to be CSV of hashtags.csv, and we're going to refer to the writing of it using CSV file2 and CSV writer2. And we're going to collect the tweet ID again for each tweet in user_tweets. Oh, well, one other thing we're going to do is we're going to change the labels of this CSV file. So the labels in the first row are going to contain the tweet ID and hashtag. Now moving down below again, we're going to collect that tweet ID, but we're not going to collect URL information. Instead, we're going to collect hashtag information. How do we do that? Well, we are going to do another for loop. That is, we're going to look at every hashtag for every hashtag in the tweet.entities file that's called hashtags, then our indented text is going to describe what we're going to do. We're simply going to take and define as hashtag the text of that hashtag. And this is a line that will do that. That command will accomplish it for you. Then we're going to print every time we have a URL extraction, a hashtag extraction, where we want to know that we've had a hashtag extraction. And then we're going to want to print below that label for hashtag extraction, the tweet ID, and then hash text. And we're going to want to call that variable hash text. Always make sure that your variables are the same from row to row. And then using CSV writer 2, which is the CSV writer instance for hashtags, we're going to want to write a row that has tweet ID in it, and then is going to have not URL text, but hash text in it. And then finally, we're going to want to gather the same kind of information. And I just copied and pasted the old hashtag one, but in this case, we're going to want to write a file with user pairs. One user is the tweeter, and the other one is the mentioned. And we'll want to have pairs in each row whenever there has been a tweet that contains Donald Trump mentioning some other Twitter user. Now, to do that, we're going to want to open yet another CSV file. We'll call all the variables related to this one CSV file 3, so that we make sure that we are gathering different information. And we're going to save it now, not in CSV of hashtags, but instead CSV of mentioned. And in this case, we're going to want to get the tweet ID so that we know when or for what tweet this mentioning behavior happened. But we are going to want to collect 2 columns of data. The first one is about the user who is doing the mentioning. And then the third and final column is the user that's been mentioned. So really, this is gathering information about a relationship. We'll start our work again by saying, hey, we're going to look at every tweet in user_tweets, and then we're going to grab the tweet ID. But we aren't interested in getting hashtag information anymore. Instead, we want to know a few things. The first thing we want to know is we want to know what's the screen name of the user doing the mentioning. Well, in this example, since we're getting tweets only for one user, real Donald Trump, which is the handle of presidential candidate Donald Trump, we'll say, oh, well, no matter what we do, the tweet user name is going to be equal to whatever the user screen name is. And if you look up the Twitter API, you'll see that the entity, the piece of information called tweet.user.screen.name, .screen_name, always get your syntax right, is the screen name for a user in a tweet. We now have the first column, tweet ID, we have the second column, user mentioning, but we need a third column. And that third column, we're going to collect by saying, hey, every time we have a screen name come across in tweet.entities, and then we'll put in a square bracket, and tweet.entities occurs in user_mentions. Why? Because these are fields in the API that Twitter uses. Every time we come across one of these things, we want to pull out the name that's mentioned. And we're going to call it mention name, and it's going to be equal to that screen name. And we're going to finally do the same thing we did with hashtags and with URLs. But this time we're not extracting a hashtag or a URL, we're extracting a mention. So I want to know, as we run this, that we have a mention extraction. And we're going to want to print out that, notice that there's a mention extraction. Then we're going to want to know the tweet ID. Then we're going to want to know the tweet user_name. And then we're going to want to know the mention name. It's going to be printed on the screen, and then finally we want to write it to a CSV file. So now we're almost ready to go. We need to proofread a bit. I see one error already, which is here in this last line. Do you notice that I don't have two end parentheses at the end to match the two parentheses at the beginning? Boy, that's going to cause a syntax error. So I'm going to fix that. And then I'm going to look at my other examples for CSV writing, and I'm going to notice that there's a similar problem up above, and there's one more problem right up there. I'm going to look again elsewhere, see if that looks good. It does. And then I will feel comfortable giving this a shot. Now, of course, to make it work, I have to put in my consumer key, my consumer secret, my access token, and my access token secret. If I don't do that, I'm not going to get the right results. So why don't I go ahead and do that, and then we'll go ahead and try to run this program. So I'll need to pause, and then we'll continue after I've put in my secrets. Okay. And to run it, of course, we'll hit Control X, and we will save the modified buffer. Okay. I'll put that secret information in, and then we'll run that program. All right. So I've gone ahead and I've gotten that information in, and now I'm going to want to run it with my secrets all in there so I can actually work with the Twitter API. I'm going to run the program. Oh, and I have a little bit of invalid syntax. This happens from time to time. It tells me exactly where it is. I'm going to go take a look, and we're going to see what the problem is. And I already have a notion of what it is. Do you notice that every time that we have a for or an if statement, that we have a colon. I think I left that out. And I did. So I'm going to put that in. I always make mistakes in syntax as I go. The key is to be able to look at that line and figure out what the pattern is that we need to have. So let's run that again. Okay, now it's telling me that we have a problem in line 29. So I'm going to look for line 29. Better twetter. I can see it already. Let's go down to line 29. Problem in our work. So it's looking for a variable in the next line called better tweet, but it couldn't find it. So when we make those mistakes, that's okay. We can fix them. Fairly easy to do. We've gone and fixed that. Now let's go and see what we can manage to do when we run it. Will that fix it? Hopefully so. We're going to run it again. Oh, and we still have a problem there. So I see what I've done. I've made another syntax error. Sometimes we make a lot of mistakes, and that's okay. That's part of the experience. So the command is not called tweet.tweet replace. We're taking the tweet and we're text replacing it. Okay, we're replacing the text of the tweet. So it's tweet.text replace. 2 errors in 2 lines. It happens all the time. And so I'm going to head back. Okay, now I have a final error here on line 30. This is debugging. It says UTF is not defined. Perhaps I've misspelled the term UTF-8. I'm supposed to put that in quotes. So I'll go ahead and do that. You can see that it appears now as something to be understood. I forgot the quote marks. So you'll need to go ahead and fix this in your text as well. I'm not worried about this. It's just part of the experience. And now I'll run it again. And take a look at that. I have a whole set of URL extractions, mention extractions, and a set of tweets. So here's the tweet that's going to be printed out. There will be massive turnout for you, Mr. Trump. Looks like this is a retweet. Okay, I've created tens of thousands of jobs and will bring back great American prosperity. That's another tweet. The date timestamp is before that. Now you notice here's a third one who says, I know our complex tax laws better than anyone who's ever run for president. I'm the only one who can fix them. And then here's a hashtag failing, and here's a mention NY Times. They're kind of shoved together, so it'll be interesting to see if we can scrape those out. Are there any URLs in this set? Yes. Okay. There are a few of them. And we have URL extractions here. And it's creating the longer form one, okay, of each of these where it exists. We have hashtag extractions, and we have the Twitter ID for each of those, failing, America First, Trump Pence, and then we have references. So and mentions. So real Donald Trump is mentioning Trumplican 2016. Real Donald Trump is mentioning himself, real Donald Trump, and finally is mentioning CNN. So if we've done our work correctly, then when we list the directory, we should see 4 CSV files. Okay, so the first is going to be called CSV of tweets. Then there's one CSV of URLs, CSV of mentions, and CSV of hashtags. Let's take a look at each in turn. Let's take a look at the tweets. CSV of tweets.csv. Yeah, this is a delimited file. It's delimited by pipe. That pipe character Microsoft Excel knows how to deal with that and turn them each into a column. And we have the date and time of the tweet. We have the unique tweet ID. Every tweet, that's a lot of numbers because there are a lot of tweets, has its own ID. And then we have the text of it. So we know which tweets we're working with. Now for those, let's take a look and see what URLs were extracted. So we'll pico to look at the text of CSV of URLs.csv. And you'll see here, there's a tweet ID, and then there's a unique URL, which was referred to in that tweet ID. Sometimes there are hashtags. So we'll look at CSV of hashtags.csv. And in that file, we'll notice that there are 5 hashtags that were used. It looks like in 5 separate tweets. And then let's take a look at mentions. CSV of mentions. Now, we have a problem. The user mentioned is not being printed. We have user mentioning, but we don't have user mentioned. It's always good to look through our CSV files. Clearly, we have a problem here. Where's that third variable? Well, let's go back and we're going to look in the program. CSV extract.py. It's at the bottom. Is it possible I just didn't include it? I said, sure, we'll include tweet username, but I forgot the last bit. We want to include, as we do when we print it, the mention name. And now we'll save it. And now we'll run it again. No harm, no foul. We all make mistakes all the time. We check our work and then we fix it. Now, let's take a look again. We've run through that information. Let's look at the CSV of mentions. And there they are. So in one tweet, this is the one that ends in 1088, real Donald Trump is referring to Trumplican, and real Donald Trump is also referring to himself. Why? Because real Donald Trump is retweeting a tweet in which Trumplican is referring to real Donald Trump. So it kind of goes back and forth. And then there's one tweet in which real Donald Trump refers to CNN. So now that we have all this information separated out, we can begin to do analysis work. So we can begin to figure out, when do certain hashtags appear together in the same tweet? We can develop lists of who was referred to. If we want to build a picture of a social network, we can use those mentions to create a graph in which there are lines connecting different accounts. We can begin to think about websites as a target. What are the websites that Donald Trump targets? We could run this again by simply, if we went to look at the work we're doing here at user tweets, we could change the name to Hillary Clinton, and we could look at Donald Trump's opponent. Does Hillary Clinton have a different kind of pattern? Let's find out. Yeah, there's a whole different set of kinds of mentions. Hillary Clinton, we can see right from here, is doing a lot more mentioning. Who is she mentioning? CSV of mentions. She's referring to the New York Times, Bernie Sanders, her husband Bill Clinton, the Peace Corps, AmeriCorps. Obviously, this is different content. What are her hashtags? Well, she didn't have any hashtags in there. Is that true? Let's verify by looking at the tweets. Is it possible that Hillary Clinton is not really much of a hashtagger? Yeah, I don't see any hashtags in here. And if we went out and we looked at, yeah, there's no hashtags. This is interesting to find out. So Donald Trump has a different way of communicating. He's a hashtagger. Hillary Clinton or her campaign is not. You can begin to see the power of this approach because once we've written the program that works once, if we want to use it again, but to study someone else, all we have to do is change the name. Now, in future videos, we're going to think about how to make that kind of process of just changing the name and looking at someone different a little bit more automatic. And we're going to think about wanting to possibly observe one user repeatedly. What if we don't want just the last few tweets, but we want to keep collecting them? There are two ways to do this. They're called cron jobs and inputs. And we're going to consider cron jobs and inputs in the next two videos of the series.